I'm Bella the Floor, your literary and esoteric host. Today we are beginning the breakdown to Genesis. We're starting with chapter 1. Before moving forward, I do recommend you watching the first video. It does set the tone for what I'm doing in this series, and I don't want to repeat those same ideas in every single video. So there is 50 chapters in Genesis. There's a lot to go through. As of now, I'll be doing one video per chapter. I may combine some chapters as I go through the text. Once this series is complete, you don't necessarily have to watch everything in order. I would strongly recommend starting with the intro. I'm barely putting some consistency into this channel, and I'm still getting a lot of things right now, such as recording audio. So if you're here right now, thank you so much. I already want to record some of the other videos I've done earlier, but I'll just keep them as is right now. So as I start this first video to Genesis, the one thing I want to retouch on is the intro video, where I state the things that I'm looking at for this series. So what we're looking at is what is being assumed, what is being demanded, and what's actually being explained. Because that distinction is very, very important. One thing here, I am not trying to get caught up in semantics. And that's just basically a fancy word for how letters and words interact with each other. It's very easy to get caught up with semantics in Genesis because it does come from the Hebrew language. In reality, the Hebrew language does not cleanly transfer over to English. There are people who do heavily focus on the translation and the original language. That's not what I'm here to do. What I'm here to do is to look at what the text presents as we have it. So what tends to happen is people start to focus heavily on individual words. And yes, words do matter. They matter a lot. But the overall structure and the statements that are being stated remain the same even when the words shift around. So because the language itself is arbitrary, which is also just a basic fancy word for saying we all have different meanings for words, and just take something as simple as a tree. One person may associate a tree with an injury, and that's because maybe they climbed it once and then they got hurt. And then another person may associate trees with home or childhood or wildlife. And maybe someone raised in the desert are not really that familiar with trees, and it's something more unfamiliar. Personally for me, when I moved to Los Angeles 4 years ago, I had no relations to palm trees. And palm trees are literally everywhere here in Los Angeles. And now when I see a picture of a palm tree, I automatically think, oh, that's my home. That's my home now. I love my home. I love palm trees. I never loved palm trees before, but now I do because I very much love Los Angeles. So every single word carries different meanings depending on how a person experiences the word. And that applies the same to reading. When you read a text, you're just not reading words, you're interpreting those words through your own experiences, through your own perspective, and where you're at your life at that moment. So that's also why you could read something once, and then you can read it again years later, and it feels completely different, and you completely get a different viewpoint, and it's just a new experience. So for this series, I'm not going to get lost in individual word choices, because we're going to lose the broader structure of what's actually being presented. And just to give you an example, if you focus on the words and or but. So an example sentence would be, and the apple fell from the tree, or but the apple fell from the tree. The two words and but, they do slightly shift the tone of the sentence, but the core idea is still the same. The apple is still falling. So I'm less concerned with the variation of wording. I'm more focused on the central ideas that are being expressed. This brings us back to the main question, and it is what is being assumed, what is being demanded, and what is actually being explained. So the best place to start is with the text itself. I'm going to be reading chapter 1 in Genesis, and then I'll break it down by the structure and the patterns within it. This is an origin story. Genesis begins with God, but does not explain what comes before God. And that's something we're going to look at very closely. So the PDF version that I'm going to put on the screen here in a minute, you can access this PDF form yourself. It will be linked in the description. I will be splitting the screen here. So let's get into it. Okay, so this is chapter 1. As you can see, not too intensive. So let's get into it. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light, and that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. And the evening and the morning were the second day. And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas. And God saw it was good. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself, upon the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself, after his kind. And God saw it was good. And the evening and the morning were the third day. And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. And so, and it was so. And God made two lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. And God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness, and God saw it was good. And the evening and the morning were the fourth day. And God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creatures that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the sea, and let the fowl multiply in the earth. And the evening and the morning were the fifth day. And God said, let the earth bring forth the living creatures after his kind, cattle, and the creeping thing, and the beasts of the earth after his kind. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw it was good. And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have domain over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them. And God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have domain over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree, in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. And to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the earth, and everything that creepeth upon the earth, where there is life, I have given every green herb for meat. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the sixth day. Okay. So, now that we read chapter 1, I want to break this down using the method I introduced earlier. I'm looking at 3 things: what is being assumed, what is being demanded, and what is actually being explained. So, the text begins with God. There's no introduction, there's no origin, and there's no explanation. God is just simply there. So the first assumption is existence. God exists, and that is not questioned. The second assumption is water. Before anything is formed, before structure, before land, there is already water. The deep is already presented. So the text does not visibly begin from nothing. It begins from a state that already exists. Another assumption is the power of speech. God speaks and reality responds. Let there be light. And there's light. There's no explanation for how that works. It simply is presented as fact. And then there is an assumption of order. Everything is divided. Lightness from dark, waters from waters, land from sea. So the text assumes that structure is necessary, that reality is meant to be organized. And finally, there is the assumption of hierarchy. Humans are created in the image of God and given domain over everything else. That position is not explained and it's simplified. The text is not just describing reality, it's telling you how to view it. So, first, the text demands authority. God speaks, and then everything follows. God declares what is good, and there's no challenge in that authority. It also demands structure. Nothing is random, everything is placed, divided, and named. The world is present, controlled, and intentional. And it also demands the acceptance of hierarchy. And there are the levels: lightness over dark, heaven over earth, humans over animals. Reality is structured in layers of power, and it demands reproduction. Be fruitful and multiply. This is presented as directive and not suggestion. So, what's actually being explained is the smallest category of this text. What we're given is a sequence, and it's a structured timeline of light, then separation, then land, then vegetation, then celestial bodies, then living creatures, then humans. So we are given an order, but no explanation. We're also given a method, but it only stays surface level. God speaks, and then everything else comes into existence. So the mechanism behind it is never explained, and we are given systems of classification, and everything reproduces after its kind. So life is being organized into categories, but again, those categories are not explained. So some key observations is that God is never defined, and he is the central figure of the entire chapter and is introduced without explanation. And water exists before creation begins. So the starting point is not nothing, it is something. Light appears before the sun as well. So the structure of the narrative is not based on physical explanation either. And the repetition in it is very consistent, such as God said, it was so, God saw that it was good. You also see ideas being reintroduced twice. This is structured, and this is part of a formula. So, also naming the names play a major role. God names everything. And naming something is also a form of control. So when you step back and you take a look at the text, the chapter is not really explaining how reality works. It's simply presenting a structured version of reality. And it's a system where everything is ordered, divided, named, and placed. So when you take the structure and you compare it to other ancient creation accounts, there is an interesting pattern that comes up. Now, I want to pause here for a moment because once you step outside of Genesis and start to look at other ancient creation accounts, you begin to see similar structural patterns. So, what I'm going to do is bring in a reference from Egyptian mythology. I'll have it here on the screen as well as we go through it. You can also find the link for this in the description. So let me bring it up on the screen and let's get into it. Okay, so this is from the Egyptian mythology by Don Nardo. And I'm using it to compare structure to Genesis. And as you could see, this is very textbook delivered. There are different prints to this text. This is just one that I liked because of the illustrations. Really great illustrations in this one. So, as I said, the link to this text is in the description. Okay, so we're getting into this because one of the main things I want to do is compare structure. And the structure presented in Genesis can be seen in multiple creation stories, which really makes you think, is it all really all that different? If everything basically comes to the same information, just all delivered differently throughout different centuries. So, I'm also not here to, claim which story is correct. I'm just here to look at what's being presented across the text. Because once you start looking into these texts, you'll just see all the similarities to them. And I think at this point, it doesn't really matter which one's correct. It's just, that's just where we're at right now. So, as I said, the main things I'm looking at is what being assumed, what is being demanded, and what's actually being explained. And I also want to keep that same mind frame as we look through the Egyptian creation story. And I want us to see how it compares when we read Genesis. So, one thing to know, the Egyptian traditions can be traced back to around 2500 BCE, and sometimes even earlier. Genesis in the written form didn't come about till about 1000 to 500 BCE. So we are looking at a pretty big gap of 1,000 years. Something that I do want to be clear about is, the Egyptian civilization, they were not primitive whatsoever. They were highly developed in mathematics, agriculture, symbolism, and one of the things we still have on this earth left behind them are the pyramids. And regardless how somebody interprets those pyramids, they show an intense level of precision and structure that people are still studying today. And as of today, we can't even replicate them. We don't have the machinery to do that. So when you think about that, we can't assume there's a lack of knowledge in older civilizations. We just don't have the information about them. We don't have the full information. So also something that was lost with ancient knowledge was the Library of Alexandria. And apparently that held huge amounts of information. And it was destroyed. And we could only imagine what was written in those books. So when we're looking at creation stories, I don't think it makes sense to dismiss them just because they're older. If anything, it should be raising questions and a sort of understanding on what these civilizations were working with, because they were definitely not random ideas. They were very intentional and structured, and they were definitely societies operating on higher forms of thought. So let's take a look at this graph right here. So as you can see, we have plenty of gods here. We have plenty. It all starts with Autumn. He is the first god. And then from him, he creates all these other gods. And so one thing I do want to point out as we see this right here is there are many gods. There's not just one god. And it wasn't really until the Bible where we see one universal God. So in the Bible, creation is coming from one source versus other creation stories where there's multiple beings. So in Genesis, everything comes from one authority. So what I'm doing in this section, this is where the Egyptian creation story is structured. And one thing to keep in mind, the Egyptians don't have just one version of creation. It's multiple stories. So I'm going to get into this with you. And right here, this is 4 creation stories. Shouldn't take too long to get through. And I'll be reading this with you just so we could compare the text with Genesis. So this is definitely where things get interesting. And here we go. Okay, so this is chapter 2. It's titled The Creation of the Gods and People. One of the many stories making up Egyptian mythology and the creation of the universe of humanity were amongst the most crucial and best known. Such a tale about how the world got started, called a cosmogony. The ancient Egyptians had a number of different cosmogonies, some which differed from or even contradicted parts of others. Just like to pause here because the Bible even contradicts itself. And you know what? As a matter of fact, if you want to get down to it, even science itself is contradicting. So, proceeding. Ooh, there's a plane flying over here. Okay, so the ancient Egyptians had a number of different cosmogonies, some which differed from or even contradicted parts of others. Most people today at first find this odd. This is because a majority of the world's leading modern faiths feature only one sole creation tale, Genesis. The main reason the Egyptians had multiple creation myths is that their religion was at first very local in character. Each town or region had its own divine benefactor who was thought to watch over the area and its inhabitants. The area might also have its own creation myth in which the local deity was said to be the creator. Okay, so that's just a little bit of background. I'm not going to read it all, just some little main points here. So scrolling down. Despite the differences in these stories, over time, the population of Egypt as a whole came to view all creation myths as more or less equally acceptable. The reason for this was the manner in which the country's priests explained those multiple myths. They told the people that the exact way creation occurred would likely always remain unclear to people. The concepts involved, they insisted, were largely beyond human comprehension. Therefore, the gods had fashioned and passed on to humanity creation stories filled with symbols and mystical ideas. So this is, as I said, the Egyptians were pretty, I feel they were just, completely different on a different spiritual wavelength. And, they accepted all the stories because none of them was actually going to be the truth of creation, because they believed it was beyond human understanding. So, just moving down a little lower here. One of Egypt's forming creation stories strongly support that self-important concept of the country residing in a central position. In a world, the myth is in question emerged from a so-called city of sin. So according to this version of creation, the god Autumn sprang into being quite suddenly and appeared miraculously from the shadowy depths of the primitive seas that existed before Earth did. An ancient hymn that Autumn quotes that primeval deity as saying, "Heaven had not come into being, the earth had not come into being, the creatures, the earth, and the reptiles have not been made in that place. I lifted myself from the watery mass. I did not find a place where I could stand. I was alone. I took courage in my heart. I laid a foundation. I made every form of living thing." So that's how Autumn comes to being. He gets lifted from water. So this is also what we see in Genesis. Everything starts with water. Even in science, you need water. Water is essential to start any living organism. And that's pretty interesting to think about, because even if you think back to a tree, the tree needs water. And once the tree is made, we make so much things with trees, like houses. That would not be possible without water. So yeah, he comes and he lifts himself from the water. So here we have Autumn. He's born from water. He's very much a water being. We are water beings. We are 70% water. So, and then he couldn't find a place to stand. So he laid down the foundation so he could stand. Okay, just scrolling down a little here. So basically, this just basically gets into, as I said, this PDF form you could find in my link if you want to read it all. I'm just gonna graze through it. This is just basically how he brings up all the other gods with them, and they all have a purpose. Okay, this one's a good one. So, a second important creation tale emerged from Egypt's first national capital, Memphis, which the pharaoh Namar had established during his unification of this country. The chief creator deity in this myth was Ptah, who also thought to protect people of various kinds. His principal power was said to be the ability to take thoughts or concept and magically transform it into reality. So Ptah's pretty cool. He basically is the one who speaks everything into existence. This just goes back to Egyptian tales where there's multiple beings and they all do something to create the reality we have today, versus Genesis, where there's only one, and I would say the more condensed version, since there's only one and there's not, rich lore behind how all this, so yeah, Ptah is the one who speaks everything into creation, and in Genesis, as I said, there's the single God, and it starts really fast. Genesis, it tells us everything. So just scrolling down again, a third story of creation of the gods and the world involved in the region surrounding the town of Kimenu, unsure if I'm pronouncing that right, later better known by its Greek name, Hermopolis, located more than 100 miles from South Memphis. Scrolling down a bit, this is where we get the Divine Eight. Okay, so this is where I wanted to get to. Autumn arose miraculously from the internal dark ocean, proceeded to create other gods in contrast in the version from Hermopolis. Let's see. So you could go into this and read this. And then we have here fashioning people and animals. This is also the fourth creation story. This is how we get our animals. But just in contrast, as you could see, we have multiple gods. They all do something. And the creation story isn't just localized to one god. So I want to pull up this image right here. And if you're interested, you could definitely go ahead and look more into Egyptian creation stories. You're going to see a lot of similarities with Genesis. I am not going fully into reading the full Egyptian creation story, but here I just wanted to show you, this is an illustration. And this is an illustration on the creation story of the Egyptian world and the Hebrew world. So look at how similar these are. Like the stories describing on how the world is built. Here we have in the Egyptian side Amon-Ra sitting on top. Then we have Shu, Nut, and Geb. And that's creating Earth right there. We have the internal waters, the Nun. Here in the Hebrew world, we have the dwelling place of the earth. We have the firmament of heaven, earth, the underworld, foundations of earth, the abyss of the water. And there's also a graph I want to show you. Okay, there's a dog howling. We have an ambulance in the background. Unsure if my sound will catch that. But I do live in Los Angeles. It is very, very, very noisy here. Very noisy. Oops, sorry, I can't find the document that I want to show. Oh, here we go. So this is another PDF if you want to read it in its entirety. I like this because what Johnston does, he creates these beautiful parallel points of both stories. And as you can see here, just on how both of the stories are laid out, both of them, they first start with precondition, life less chaotic, watery deep. That's very important. Life starts in the watery deep. And then, of course, in the pyramid text, Amam, he moves among the waters. And then in the Hebrew text, Elohim moves on the water. And then creation of the supernatural, which is the light. We see that both. Then we get the firmament, which is also the primordial hill in the midness of none. Then we have pre-creation of the sky, Shu, and then in the Hebrew side, creation sky, when the waters were raised above the firmament. So, just gonna put this on the screen. This is the left side is the Egyptian side, the right side is the Hebrew side. All very similar. Very, very similar. As I said, the PDF form is in the description. So moving on. Okay, I am going to go through one more creation story. And this one's from the Enuma Elish. And this comes from ancient Mesopotamia. This is around the 2nd millennial BCE, so it is a little earlier from Genesis. This is from the first tablet. I will have the PDF form if you want to read its entirety. And just from this first page right here, we could just see the similarities of the creation story. So here we go. When in the height heaven was not named, and the earth beneath did not bear a name, and the primeval Apsu, who begot them, and Chaos, Tamut, the mother of them both. Their waters were mingled together, and no field was formed, no marsh was to be seen. When of the gods none had been called into being, and none bore name, and no destinies were ordained. Then were created the gods in the midst of heaven. Lamu and Lahamu were called into being. Ages increased. Then Ansar and Kaisar were created over them. Long were the days, then there came forth Anu, their son, Ansar and Anu, and the god Anu. Nudimud, whom his father, his begetters, abounding in all wisdom. He was exceedingly strong, he had no rival. Thus were established and were the great gods. But Tamu and Apsu were still in confusion. They were troubled and in disorder. Apru was not diminished in might, and Tamu roared. So that one is definitely a little harder to read, but overall we get the story. There was an earth beneath them. The earth was already there. It had no name. And then Apsut was there. There was no gods into being. Nothing had a name. And then there we have it again. Their waters were mingled together. Water mingling together. So just from that opening, you could already see the patterns. It starts in a similar way before anything is named, before the structure, before the land, and there's water. So the waters mingle together. So again, we're starting from the same point where we've seen already in the Egyptian story and then also in Genesis. So, and this, just like the Egyptian story as well, this isn't one source, it's multiple beings. And once these things take form, they get a name, and then structure starts to develop. So you're basically saying the same movement across all these texts, which is no structure, then naming, then formation, then development. So in all three, Genesis, the Egyptian creation, and Mesopotamian creation story, we see all the same foundation. It's first water, then movement, then structure, then life, and the difference is just on how it's being presented. So, as I said, Genesis keeps everything under one God, and Egyptian and Mesopotamian traditions, they all expand that into multiple sources. But structurally, all the stories, they're all doing the same thing. So the question becomes, what are all those texts actually trying to do? Because none of them actually explain origin, and they're all doing something else, but something quite larger. So now we're going to go into chapter 2, and this is definitely where things start to shift, because chapter 1 in Genesis gives us overall structure, and chapter 2 does get a little more specific. And instead of building the world into layers, it starts focusing on humanity. So we're going to look at how that changes the structure and what new assumptions start showing up. That is all I have for today. Sorry for any background noise. I think right now they were starting construction or something out there. So if you want to support my channel, here's the QR code right here. Your donation just allows me to help creating, researching, and informing. In my next video, we will be getting into Genesis chapter 2. You can follow me across all platforms. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time.